In the past couple of minutes, things have really ramped up here in Minneapolis' Hawthorne neighborhood. Just seconds ago, these ICE agents just deployed chemical irritant. They also were deploying pepper balls on the ground. People have been trying to flush their eyes with water as they have been sprayed with tear gas. This line of federal agents and protesters has moved back here. Now you can see this line here. These are all ICE officers. Some have actual guns on them. Some just have guns that are shooting pepper balls. And this crowd of protesters has grown quite significantly in the past 10 to 15 minutes since we've been here. First, I would say there was just a couple of dozen protesters who were blowing their whistles. And what those whistles do, Julie, is they alert the neighbors that there is an ICE presence here. Now that crowd, I would say, is to about 50 to 75 protesters, if not more, who are incredibly angry and agitated with these ICE officers. We still have no confirmed information about what happened here, besides reports from MPD that there was an ICE-involved shooting. We have protesters here who are throwing ice and snowballs at these federal agents, and those federal agents in return are then spraying those pepper balls on the ground, which make you cough and kind of tear up. And they've also been spraying pepper spray into the eyes of protesters. So things are getting quite heated here, Julie. You can see protesters throwing items back at these federal agents as the perimeter was secure at one point. Protesters weren't moving, and then that perimeter was broken, and now it has moved up the street here. And I apologize for my coughing, Julie, as these pepper balls spread throughout the air. But this situation really shows no signs of slowing down right now, as we're still waiting for any confirmed information about what happened here this evening. We did see an ambulance about 20-25 minutes ago who was here on scene that then drove away from the scene. In terms of agencies that we have seen here, MPD was here for some time. I have not seen any MPD officers for a little bit of time. I would say 15 or 20 minutes. All that is here right now, at least from where we are standing, are those federal ICE agents. They just deployed some flashbangs, again, try to push that crowd back. What you see is these crowds move forward. They try to push the line in terms of where those ICE agents are holding strong, and then those ICE agents will then deploy chemical irritant, whether that be a pepper ball or some sort of chemical irritant spray that they spray into people's eyes. But it escalated a little bit when we saw those flashbangs that exploded. Everyone ran back from the scene, but now, once people start to feel comfortable again, they start moving up again. So these are where we get these confrontations every 2 to 3 minutes between the ICE agents and the protesters, as the protesters continue to record and then continue to throw ice and snow. There you go, there are some more flashbangs, Julie, right there, that then release a chemical irritant into the air. And those protesters in return try to throw those flashbangs back at the ICE agents, or they are throwing snow or ice to those agents, Julie.
All right, I know you're standing awfully close to everything that's going on there. I'm just wondering, can you give people a better understanding what that neighborhood is like? What is the scene like? It looks like it's just residential. Am I missing anything? To help people get a better perspective of where this is exactly?
No, you're absolutely correct, Julie. We're going to back up here, Julie. We're going to back up here. Yeah, it's a completely residential area, just homes and apartment buildings in the area. There is a park.
There's a park
down the street, Julie. It looks like these ICE agents are really trying to take control of the perimeter here again, Julie. So we're going to keep backing up and keep a safe distance from everything.
Yeah, please do. And are you seeing MPD as well, or mostly just federal agents from your vantage point?
From my vantage point, Julie, I'm only seeing federal agents. I do not know if MPD is down the street, but in terms of this perimeter and who is setting off these flashbangs and spraying these pepper balls, it is all federal agents, Julie. The protesters were staying behind that perimeter, Julie. Of course, they were swearing and getting up into the faces of ICE agents. The ICE agents then backed up a little bit, and that's when that perimeter was broken. If our photographer can show you now as we get into the street here, this was the original perimeter that these ICE agents set up, this line of law enforcement. So they seem to have taken back that line, but when things escalated was when that line got pushed back and these protesters started walking down the street and continued to get into the faces of these ICE agents. But now it is a ton of flashbangs and chemical irritants that are being deployed by these ICE agents to try to push the protesters back. I want to show you the line of federal agents behind me, and this is noteworthy because when we got here on scene around 8, this line of now a couple dozen federal agents was only about 5 or 6 federal agents that were keeping the peace here and were trying to keep this perimeter. But now they have brought in 2 to 3 dozen federal agents to try to keep protesters back. As my photographer gives you a better vantage point here, Julie. So the crowd, as Raya was mentioning on her end, the crowd on our end here on North 25th Avenue has also only continued to grow in the 45 minutes to an hour that we have been here, Julie. So, as Raya was mentioning on her end, MPD does not have a large presence of any presence at all here on the scene. It is all being controlled by these federal agents. The crowd only continues to grow. There was a couple dozen protesters here when we arrived on scene about 30 to 45 minutes ago. Now I would say there's at least 100, if not more, protesters that are here. And you may hear in the background, you hear these whistles, and these protesters keep blowing these whistles. And what their intention is with doing that is to alert others in the neighborhood that ICE is here and that there is ICE activity going on. And as you just mentioned, Julie, the AP reporting that one man was shot in the leg. I'm sure as word of that gets out, that more protesters will start to come to the scene. I want to kind of take people back to what we have seen in the 45 minutes we have been here. We saw an ambulance leave the scene right when we got here, and that was when there was only a couple dozen protesters. But that group has to continue to grow as, here we go, Julie, more chemical irritant being deployed. And there are some flashbangs, Julie.
All right, Joe, we're going to let
you disperse the crowd here.
Okay, we're going to let you get to a safer location.
No sign of the crowd getting any smaller. I would say every minute or two we see those federal law enforcement deploy those flashbangs or chemical irritant to try to disperse the crowd and back them up. But that doesn't seem to deter the crowd. It deters the crowd for a moment, and then about a minute or two later, they're right back up there, and that's when we see those federal agents deploy those flashbangs or chemical irritants again, Julie. These are Stinger rubber balls. These are being shot to the ground at these protesters, Julie. But what we have seen in the past 45 minutes to an hour, what we've been there is this increased escalation. When we first got here on scene, there were a couple dozen protesters maybe and 5 or 6 ICE agents that were holding a line in a perimeter. And now, as you can see, there's at least 100 to 200 protesters here. And this line of ICE agents that has grown significantly in the past 30 minutes, we have seen significant clashes between these ICE agents and the protesters as ICE agents have deployed chemical irritant, they have deployed pepper balls, they've deployed those rubber, almost grenade-looking things as I showed you earlier. So what will happen is that the ICE agents will hold this line here, and then the protesters will advance, and eventually the ICE agents will shoot those chemical irritants to back them up, and that's just happened repeatedly. What we are seeing from the protesters is, of course, chanting, and they're extremely angry and agitated with these ICE agents and what they're doing in our communities, and the protesters will then throw snowballs or ice at these federal agents, Julie. But the crowd has only grown significantly in the hour that we have been here, and it doesn't look like these people plan to go home anytime soon.
Well, I'm curious because it appears from DHS's statement that the officer involved and the man who was shot have both left the scene and are in the hospital. So I'm curious how long ICE will remain in that area now that it appears that situation has been resolved. But it doesn't appear to you that they're leaving or they're trying to clear out of that scene?
No, ICE has been holding this line for the past hour, Julie, since we've been here. About 5 minutes after we got on scene, which would have been right after 8 o'clock, we did see one ambulance leave the scene. Of course, we don't know if there was an ICE agent who was in that ambulance or if it was the individual who was shot. But it does not appear that ICE has any plan of leaving. And it's interesting because there's no, from what we can see at our vantage point on this side, Julie, there is no Minneapolis police presence. So you see these cars coming through. These are just pedestrians and people trying to drive through the neighborhood, but there's no one here to direct traffic. So you have a couple hundred protesters who are in the street, and then you have this line of a couple dozen federal agents. What we've been seeing on our end of the street, Julie, in the past 10 to 15 minutes, if things have remained fairly calm in terms of there haven't been any flashbangs deployed and there haven't been any chemical irritant that has been deployed, but we keep hearing those flashbangs that are being deployed on the other end of the street where Raya is. There's just a line here that you can see of 2 to 3 dozen federal agents that are holding guns. Those aren't not actual weapons, but guns that have chemical irritant in them that they spray at the ground, and then that chemical irritant goes into the air and it backs up these protesters. So I would say there is 100 to 200 protesters that are on our side of the street, Julie, and they continue to chant, "Whose streets? Our streets." We have a man who just began banging on a drum here. So we hope that the clashes that we've seen between the protesters and the federal agents in terms of protesters throwing ice and snowballs and trying to push their way up will stop, at least on our end of the street. But it doesn't seem like these protesters have any plan of going home anytime soon, Julie. These are the tear gas canisters that law enforcement, those federal agents are deploying to try to disperse the crowds. This is what we were hit with just a few minutes ago. Behind me though, Julie, we now have state officials, that state patrol in those lime green vests, and then these are also Minneapolis police officers who are trying to hold the scene here and hold the line. I believe that the federal agents, the ICE agents, are just a block down. They have another perimeter there. I want to take viewers quickly through what we have seen throughout the night. We got here at around 8 p.m. and there was a couple dozen protesters and about 5 or 6 ICE agents that were clashing, yelling at each other, etc. Over time, that crowd has continued to grow to hundreds of protesters, and that line of federal agents has continued to grow. We're going to back up a little bit here, Julie, to make sure we don't get hit with any chemical irritant. But what we have been seeing, Julie, is continual clashes between federal agents and between the protesters. And what will happen is those federal agents will deploy a chemical irritant, whether that be tear gas or a pepper bomb. The protesters will back up, and then a couple minutes later, they will come back up and start clashing with those federal agents. We were seeing protesters throwing snow and ice at those federal agents, and I also want to play some sound from a man about what he saw one of those protesters do to a federal agent. Take a listen.
We were down at Whipple, and we were protesting down at Whipple, and we got wind that there was a shooting up here, so we all headed up here. And as soon as we got here, ICE had the road blocked off right here, and people surrounded their cars, busted out a couple windows. A guy jumped in the front seat with one of the assholes, punched him in the face. It was absolute mayhem when we first got here. I mean, they finally took control of the street. That's why they're all there, but they weren't like that before when we first got here. They were all surrounded by protesters.
So you said one of the protesters jumped in the vehicle of an ICE agent?
Yeah, and punched him in the face and then jumped back out of the vehicle.
Now, this presence of State Patrol and MPD officers, that is new on scene. That happened, I would say, about 20 to 30 minutes ago. So it seems like some of the ICE agents have left. As I mentioned, they seem to be about a block down, holding another perimeter, those federal agents. But these protesters, they're banging on drums here. They've been chanting, stay off of our streets, that these are our streets. And you also can hear those whistles. And what those whistles are doing is they are trying to alert people in the neighborhood that there is this federal law enforcement present and that there are ICE agents in the neighborhood. So Julie, what we hope right now is that law enforcement is able to keep the scene peaceful and that we don't see any more clashes between these protesters and law enforcement, Julie. We did want to back up because things are, tensions are extremely high, and we want to try to ensure that we keep a safe distance from any of that chemical irritant that law enforcement could potentially deploy again. So we wanted to take a step back to make sure we are safe. There is still, I would say, 100 or so protesters that are lined up facing State Patrol and Minneapolis police officers. There's a couple people banging on drums down there. They're chanting, "Whose streets? Our streets." What we see about half a block away is about 10 to 15 federal agents. And as you've been mentioning, Julie, throughout the broadcast, it's hard to know exactly what is going on everywhere, because we can only see just a narrow stretch of what is going on here. What I want to tell viewers is what happened right before we came on the air here at 10 o'clock is at one point this street here, you couldn't see halfway down the street because it was filled with orange smoke from chemical irritant and from tear gas that had been deployed. So thankfully that has cleared the air, but because that is out of the air, we now have this large gathering of protesters again, and we have a large amount of State Patrol officers and Minneapolis Police Department officers who are trying to hold that line and make sure that protesters do not cross that, Julie. There's a development right now. It appears that MPD is leaving the scene. I'm going to have my photographer Tyler zoom in here. Yep, here we go. It appears MPD and State Patrol is backing up here. We saw someone just throw a water bottle into the air. Of course, we're not sure where eventually MPD or State Patrol is ultimately going to go. We just saw another protester throw ice chunks, and there we go. Here, flashbangs, Julie. We're going to back up here, but remain safe. But they are deploying the tear gas and flashbangs as MPD and State Patrol is trying to back up and clear the scene, and they're deploying that chemical irritant to, of course, we apologize for that profanity there, Julie, but they're deploying that chemical irritant to hey, no trouble. Hey, sorry, we just had a protester show us. We're all good though. They just deployed that chemical irritant to try to disperse the crowd as MPD and federal and State Patrol, was backing away from the scene, Julie. Thankfully, Julie, a lot of there's still some chemical irritant in the air. Thankfully, Julie, a lot of those protesters have gone home. There is still a semi-sizable crowd here of protesters, but quite frankly, I believe, at least from our vantage point, I only want to report what we can see, but from our vantage point, we cannot see any more law enforcement, either federal law enforcement or local law enforcement or State Patrol officers. So that is a good scene, Julie. And what we have seen, including at the situation a week ago when Renee Good was killed, is once those law enforcement officers leave, that tends to, the situation then tends to die down, and that's exactly what we saw here. We saw those NPD officers and those State Patrol officers leave the scene. They deployed a chemical irritant so they could safely leave and keep the protesters back, and then once that happened, a lot of these protesters began to leave. So we still have protesters here who are banging on drums, making noise, walking in the street, but even now, traffic is flowing in both directions now. So you would like to believe that these protesters will soon all go home and that we can end the night on a peaceful note here, Julie. And thankfully, it doesn't seem like I know O'Hara mentioned things have turned unlawful at times, and that is completely true, but it doesn't seem like anything escalated to a seriously dangerous level here tonight, Julie. Julie, I want to show you some of the destruction that is out here. We believe that this is a federal vehicle because you can see the police lights here and also these police light bar here and these plates, out-of-state plates from Virginia. But this is what protesters did to this federal vehicle. They spray painted it. Every single window has been busted open. Things have been stolen out of the car. You can see things strewn across the street. We have clothes, deodorant, Cliff Bars. This is the first time, Julie, we have seen any destruction from tonight, but protesters completely dismantled what appears to be the vehicle of a federal agent, and they even spray painted inside the hood of the car here, Julie. I heard Ryan mention that a car was damaged, and this appears to be the one. I don't know if there's any other vehicles that have been damaged here, Julie, but this one, they clearly were either using some object to smash the windshield here. They smashed the windows. They wrote profanity on the side of the car here. Here is just some aftermath of what transpired here tonight, Julie.